The Minnesota Vikings have been around since 1961. And we just want them to win a damn Super Bowl before we die. Welcome to Before We Die with Jesse and Thor on Purple Daily and Score North.
What's going on, you guys? We are back for episode 2 of Before We Die with Jesse and Thor on Purple Daily and Score North. I'm Jesse Pierce. He's Thor Nystrom. Here to talk a little Vikings again. We had our first episode debut on Monday. Thank you to all of you for checking it out. We have Arif Hasan of The Athletic joining us a little bit later to tell us what he's been seeing at camp. But Thor, let's dive in. Football preseason starts tonight. The Jacksonville Jaguars take on the Las Vegas Raiders in the Hall of Fame game in Canton, Ohio. Are you excited? Are you like, meh, whatever? Did you even know that a preseason game was happening tonight?
I didn't, because the Vikings aren't playing in it. But now that I do, I'm going to be watching. You know, I mean, football's back. It's a great thing. You have to love it. So, yeah, I mean, the teams we're getting offered today, maybe not the best, but getting to tune into football, that is the best.
I know. What are the Jags even, right? Like, they're just kind of this weird anomaly. I know we were talking before the show with our producer, Ross Brindell, and he said there should be just a lower bar set for the Jaguars most of the time, just because they're just kind of this, they're there. They're just always there.
Yeah, they're the argument that the NFL should do what do you call that? Regulation or relegation?
Yes.
I'm not a big European soccer guy, but it's a great concept, and Jacksonville is our argument for it.
Yeah, there you go. That Hall of Fame game again happening tonight, 7 p.m. on NBC. The Vikings will not open up their preseason until August 14th. August, guys, not October. August 14th in Las Vegas. But let's talk a little bit more Vikings again before Arif joins us. Irv Smith Jr., who we talked about on Monday, having a breakout campaign. Everybody was excited, like, here we go. This is the tight end. And he hurt his thumb and is hopeful to be ready to go for the season, but still question mark. I mean, is this again a classic Vikings, classic Minnesota situation? You got to feel for Irv Smith Jr.
Yeah, this wasn't the break we were hoping for, right? I mean, yeah, and it seems
Literally.
like every single offseason it's the same thing. In June, July, May, whatever, there's this hope that it's going to be the Irv Smith breakout year. And then it just gets deferred to another year. Now, the Vikings say that they're optimistic that Irv is going to be ready for week 1. But this is a guy that didn't play last year that's already the fit of of him in the offense. We talked about this last time is Irv a true inline guy? Can he play inline? Can he hold up at inline over the course of the season? Now we'll have to see if that's the case. But this certainly is not a good sign. And then getting up to speed in Kevin O'Connell's new scheme, where we were talking about the ways that they are planning to get Irv Smith the ball in space. Are those plans going to be compromised at all from him being out? And then the other thing that's interesting is even if Irv Smith was 100% healthy, the Vikings had terrible tight end depth. One of the worst depth charts of tight ends in the entire NFL. Now without Irv Smith, what do you do? Is Johnny Munt going to be your starting tight end? Who would even be his backup? Are we talking about like Ellefson? Did they trust Zach Davidson at all? There's a lot of questions, and I hope Arif is going to give us some answers on those questions.
Yeah, again, Arif Hasan of The Athletic joining us in just a couple minutes here. But, going back to Irv Smith Jr., how much longer do you keep saying, okay, yes, next year will be the year. Next year will be the year. I mean, at what point do you just kind of look at it and be like, maybe this is never going to be the year for Irv Smith Jr.? I mean, there is that lack of tight end depth. So who does step up?
Well, for me, this is the referendum year for Irv. I'm not doing the thing again of rolling it forward. And if this year is another 0 where I'm still hoping for the guy, and again, I see Irv a little bit different than other people do. I did when he was coming into the league, and I still do. I think he is more of a niche manufactured touch H-back type than a true inline guy. And if he can't even stay healthy to do that, you can't look at him as a building block of your team going forward. Now, with him on, with this current staff, I do think that I did think that there was a shot of that breakout season. I think the odds of that get cut a little bit by him not being available for most of camp is what it's looking like it's going to be. But, if he can play out the season, we'll see how it goes. But not a great day for Irv Smith.
As I mentioned, Arif Hasan of The Athletic joining us. I do want to get his input on Irv Smith to kick things off. So let's welcome Arif to the show. Hey, Arif, how are you?
Hey, what's going on?
What's up, buddy?
Hey.
Just a Mr. Popular, a busy man out there doing pods every other day, doing a little writing on the side. Are you happy football season's here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, clearly getting a lot of attention, right? So I can't hate that.
Yeah.
But no, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to watch the Raiders Jaguars pretend to play a game of football tonight. It's been a bit. It'll be like the USFL, which everyone knows I was a huge fan of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really excited. We've been talking about football all off season. Finally get to see all of the stuff we've been speculating play out.
All right. So we were just talking about Irv Smith Jr. Obviously, we talked about the lack of tight end depth. What are the odds that the Vikings look at free agency as a possibility to help plump up that? I mean, Jared Cook is still available. There are some other guys, some other names that could maybe help at least in the short term or in the interim until maybe Irv Smith is able to be that full impact player that you want.
I wish I had a better kind of understanding of where the Vikings stand on this. It's pretty unclear what they would do. I think Jared Cook, for example, would make a ton of sense given his familiarity with the Rams system and the offense that the Vikings are running. I'm not confident in the kind of depth that they have. The Vikings obviously, publicly will say that they're confident, but the way that they talk about it, right, is just like, hey, when you have a player go down, sometimes you have a bunch of different ways that you resolve that problem, right? You CJ Ham in there or Johnny Mutt and maybe, more 3 or 4 receiver sets. And it's just like, wow, okay, that just means you don't have a backup tight end. That's what that means, right? And so I do believe them when they say that they expect him by or near week 1. They've been extremely forthcoming about injuries that are occurring in camp, which is not something I remember from the previous regime. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that. They do have a little bit of cap space to be able to handle this sort of thing. I'm sure that they would want to wait for an in-season emergency, but my guess, if I were gun to my head, I would say that they probably wouldn't. But I would not be shocked if they brought someone in. I think that for the most part that they expect Irv Smith to be ready, and they kind of just want to build around the kind of offensive personnel that they have.
Arif, a follow-up question on that. If Irv Smith is not ready for the beginning of the season, number one, are you or do you think they would be comfortable running Johnny Munt out as the starting inline guy for a couple weeks? And then part 2 of that question, the guys behind him, Ellefson, Davidson, some of those different guys, do any of those guys excite you as active roster guys for this coming season? Or are you out on those guys and think that those essentially it's another roster spot that you could use to fill signing a veteran tight end potentially?
So as a receiving tight end, I don't think Ellefson, has a lot going for him. And it pains me to say this, I don't like NDSU guys, but he is a really wonderful blocker. He's a really good blocking tight end. And he can actually run a pretty good route. It's just you're not going to see him deep downfield or anything like that. So I do think that the plan would be primarily to have just Johnny Munt out there and to have kind of, again, a constellation of ways that you're going to deal with it, either by having formations that allow you flexibility by, putting CJ Ham in line or as a wing, or by, putting another receiver out there because they really like, kind of what KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen can do as blockers from the slot, just kind of those kinds of things that will allow them to kind of work around the fact of not having Irv Smith. And again, it would only be for about 1 or 2 weeks. And I think that was more likely going to be the solution than it is to have a straight up 1-for-1 replacement. But in that world, in that scenario, it would be Johnny Munt. And then behind Johnny Munt, I'm not crazy confident. Now, Zach Davidson's having a really wonderful camp. It's one of those things where I kind of don't believe it, right? Like it's more of a, he's playing well against the second team. He's playing well because the second team quarterback loves to check down and he happens to be the check down guy, those sorts of things. But he's had some pretty good opportunities with the first team with Irv Smith out a little bit. And so there is something there. I just need to see a little bit more before I'm confident that Davidson, who has the most upside of almost any player in camp, right? I think I'm going to need to see a little bit more before I'm comfortable saying that he's going to have a meaningful impact on the season.
Sort of a follow-up question involving Davidson and a couple more guys. You made your newest version of the 53-man projections earlier this week. You've done a couple before, but we got an updated version. You had a couple guys on there that surprised me as far as guys that were not going to make the roster. And then at least one big surprise, I thought, as far as a guy making the roster. I wanted to ask you about that. Among guys that you had not making the roster in this current one, Davidson, who we're talking about, Wyatt Davis, Janaris Robinson, Chaz Surratt. You insinuated that Kellen Mond maybe shouldn't feel the most comfortable. And then, but one of the surprise guys that you had in was Zach McLeod, who was a guy who was off my radar. When I was putting together my 500 big board, he was way, way, way down there. The Vikings clearly liked him more, not only than me, than a lot of other teams. You know, when you were watching the UDFA free-for-all play out, they were pretty aggressive in going after him.
Yeah, they paid him a bit.
They did pay him a bit for a UDFA. So I'm curious your observations on Zach McLeod and what you're hearing and what pushed you to project him onto the roster. And then the second part of that question, is it too early to start panning the 2021 draft class when we're talking about that many guys from that class that you think have a shot to get cut?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting when you evaluate that class. One thing to keep in mind is that they found a starting quality safety in Cameron Bynum in that class. So relatively speaking, credit to them for that. But yeah, I think for the most part, that 2020 class is not going to come off stellar reviews after this cut down. I could be wrong about a couple of these guys. I'd be shocked if I was wrong about all of these guys, right? They're probably only going to keep 4 linebackers. I don't see how Chaz Surratt makes it in that scenario. I don't think any of the beat writers around here have Wyatt Davis making the team, even in a scenario where they, cut Garrett Bradbury of all things, which I think would be kind of the shocking dark horse veteran cut, which Vikings fans would understand, of course, and create another roster spot for offensive linemen. And maybe even if they keep 10 offensive linemen, I still don't see Wyatt Davis making the team. I think that it's just, they're not giving him opportunities. They've clearly signaled what they believe about him, and it is generally not positive stuff. So, Kellen Mond is having a really, really poor camp right now. It might, kind of improve over time. We might see a good preseason from him, and that could certainly change things. But, his timing is off. His accuracy is off. He hasn't been able to do more than, like I said, check down to Zach Davidson. And he's missing a lot of these deep shots. And so I think for the most part, this draft class is just not looking good. And then, of course, if Janarius Robinson, gets cut for, Zach McLeod, and the guy I was deciding between was actually him and Andre Mintz, who they grabbed from, I want to say Denver.
Vandy.
Yeah, he's a Vandy guy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The NFL team they grabbed him from.
Yeah.
But, so, and Mintz actually just, right after I published that, Mintz had a phenomenal day in camp. He's deep downfield, deflecting a pass to Zach Davidson, in the corner of the end zone, while also being a really effective pass rusher that's winning his one-on-one drills. So both McLeod and Mintz have actually looked really good in camp. Janarius Robinson has struggled against players like Blake Brandel and Oli Udoh, the backup tackles. And so I think that, there's a lot of opportunity for a fifth edge rusher to really kind of make a name for themselves. And I think McLeod, at the time I wrote that, was doing the best. And now I think it might be Mintz. It's actually really difficult. But I think that, a lot of these teams end up surprising you by putting a UDFA on the team and cutting a guy that everyone thought they were going to make. It happens every year at every team. And I think if I were going to call my shot, it might be at edge rusher.
Interesting. You mentioned Garrett Bradbury. I want to talk about him too, as many Vikings fans do. How is he looking? I hear the struggles continue. And tell me a little bit about Chris Reed too, who's really making a name for himself, it sounds like, at camp at center as well.
Yeah. I don't know if this is in the Vikings' plans, but they've rotated Austin Schlottman and Chris Reed on the second team between guard and center. Chris Reed has a bit of preseason experience at center, but he doesn't have any live NFL reps at center. But they view him as a guy that can back up all 3 interior positions. Of course, Austin Schlottman is primarily a center, and they're seeing if he can play at guard. And my theory is, I've got no basis for this. My theory is they're thinking about, Chris Reed, who played really well at guard for the Colts last year as an injury replacement, could potentially be a starting quality center for them. The problem is that Chris Reed has had some snapping issues while under center, not in shotgun, while under center with Kellen Mond. Now, as much as I've been begging on Kellen Mond, I think it's unlikely that this is Kellen Mond's fault. He's been doing fine when Austin Schlottman's under center, for example, right? But that's something that they're going to have to nail down if they're really going to make, a transition between the starting center, Garrett Bradbury, who's very rarely had snapping issues, not none, but rarely had snapping issues, and Chris Reed. But Bradbury's been having, in my eyes, a really disastrous camp for him. And he's never really had a great training camp, which, is not a shock given how he's played in the regular season, but this is perhaps the most disastrous it's been for him. He's been bowled over in one-on-ones. Harrison Phillips has been eating his lunch day in and day out in team drills, and one-on-ones are biased against center. So you want to take a look at him in team drills. And in team drills, he hasn't really been making a ton of headway. All these guards are doing a pretty good job getting to the second level. He's had trouble getting off of his blocks or keeping the center clean. So he's been having a really, really poor camp. And that's kind of where I see the Vikings, mixing up at center to see what their options are is maybe a sign that they could potentially cut Garrett Bradbury.
What is the reasoning that Garrett Bradbury does struggle at camp so often? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Like you mentioned, he was just very much ragdolled by Harrison Phillips, right? And just bowled over. I mean,
brutal.
What is going on there? Why?
So the training camp environment in particular is really just bad for centers because you put them in a lot of one-on-one drills where they don't have help from the guards. There's a lot more space for a defensive lineman to be able to make some moves and get past a center than there is in an actual NFL game. And so you've got that combination of the fact that centers are expected to have guard help and that there's just more pass rush space available for defensive linemen. It is just going to be really difficult for a center to perform well. On top of that, one of Garrett Bradbury's weaknesses is his anchor, his ability to stay stout, his lower body strength, his ability to win against strength. And given that combination of a disadvantage against him and the fact that his weaknesses are highlighted in a camp environment, given that the one-on-one drills can help prioritize some nose tackles of a lot of strength, it's just not going to look good for him. That on top of the fact that he doesn't seem to be a particularly good player, and I say this relatively speaking, he's obviously, an NFL quality player, but maybe not a top 32 player, right?
Sure.
That I think is what really magnifies the situation and makes it very likely that someone like Garrett Bradbury has difficulty, performing in a camp environment.
Sure.
Sticking with that offensive line, question number one, do you think that Chris Reed could be a viable NFL starting center this coming season if they did do a shocking thing, like whether it's cut Bradbury or whether that they just stick him on the bench and he acts as the depth piece? And then number two, same sort of question, just moving one spot to the right. Do you think Jesse Davis, from what you've seen, what you've heard, do you think he can be a functional NFL starting right guard? Obviously, last year he didn't play any snaps there, played some at left guard. He's played some right guard in the past, but do you think that, extrapolated over a full season, that he's going to be at least an average starting right guard in the NFL?
I mean, he's got a great name, so that's off on the right foot to start. Yeah.
So I'll say this. I think that should both of them start at those respective positions, center and right guard, I think both of them are very likely to be below average players. And I think that they would also be significant upgrades over what the Vikings had last year, right? And that's kind of how you build a team sometimes. Sometimes, you're running out of cap space, you're running out of draft capital, and you're like, well, we can upgrade here. I don't know if anyone's going to be, excited about what happens here. Jesse Davis has been having an all right camp. As a right guard. You take a look at his history. He's been worse at tackle than he has been at guard, and especially at right guard, which I think was a couple of years ago last time he played right guard. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say that he's, lit the world on fire as a guard. If he had, Miami would have just had him play guard, right? As opposed to just being a backup everything that happens to start 16 games every year, based off of, kind of whatever disasters are happening along the Miami offensive line. But I think that, those are areas of concern should they continue to be staffed by Chris Reed and Jesse Davis, but there are also areas where the Vikings have, kind of spackle on the wall in terms of trying to make sure that everything is kind of in tip top shape and looking good. I don't know, like Colts fans to me have been overrating Chris Reed because of the role that he's played for the Colts. When you have an injury backup come in and not be a disaster, I think that is a blessing for any NFL team. It just very rarely happens. And that's what happened for the Colts. And then, he goes on from the Colts to the Vikings and now we're considering him for a starting position, which is a whole different level of expectation. Now he obviously has to get the snapping thing under control before the Vikings can even remotely consider this. And so, which I think is one reason that Mason Cole, for example, last year was not seriously considered for the starting center job until, of course, the injuries forced their hand. That I think is going to be a critical. I mean, because it starts every play. You can't mess it up, right? You don't have to worry about pass protection if you're fumbling the ball at the beginning of the play. So, obviously that this has to be kind of resolved before they can move forward. But if that gets resolved, I think it's a serious consideration, and I think it's an opportunity for the Vikings to have a moderate upgrade, one where they're going to be seeking an upgrade in the next offseason, should that be the case.
We talk about the couple of spots on offense, the problem spots or the spots that need to get better. Before we let you run, Arif, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the one on defense, the secondary. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of different things. Number one, break down and handicap the race for safety two between Cam Bynum and Louis Cine. Give us an idea of what you think each brings to the team, and if one wins, this is why the coaching staff made that decision, et cetera. Number two, what are the odds that Andrew Booth wins a starting job this coming season? And what have you been hearing about him coming out of camp? And then the last one, is there any concern? We talked about the tight end depth. Is there any concerns about the nickel depth? You have Chandon Sullivan, who was an okay, slot guy for the Packers. But behind him, the Vikings really don't have any prototypical slot defenders. The rest of their cornerback room, it's more of your sort of prototypical outside boundary guy. That the bigger, longer guys break that stuff down for us. The secondary.
Sure. I'll try to go in order. So I think at the beginning, if we start with Cameron Bynum, Lucine, I think if we're talking about who gets more snaps over the course of the season, I think that you've got basically a 70-75% chance that that's Lucine. If we're talking about week 1 against the Packers, I think you've got maybe about a 60% chance that it's Cameron Bynum who's starting at safety. I think that it's going to be something that kind of comes along. They're going to play a lot of 3 safety sets where we're going to have both of them on the field along with Harrison Smith. But for the most part, I think that at the beginning of camp, the Vikings have signaled that they're going to force Lucine to attempt to win the job from Cameron Bynum, who, again, I think is actually a good player. I think that he's an above average starting safety, and they just happen to find an opportunity in the draft to find a guy that they think is going to be great. That might not even happen year 1, whether or not Lucine is great, right? And so I think that for the most part, we're going to see Cameron Bynum begin the early weeks in the season. And as Lucine kind of learns more, picks up more, that's what's going to happen. The problem, of course, is the way that they want to set up their defense, which speaks to the second part of that first question, which is kind of what they bring to the table. Cameron Bynum, I think, is more kind of just a traditional free safety that you kind of want roaming up top. But the way the defense is set up, they start every snap basically in 2 high and then rotate in order to kind of confuse what quarterbacks are seeing. And if you do that, you kind of want both safeties to be able to do both jobs. I don't know that Cameron Bynum can do that. I think he's more of a free safety type. I'd be happy to be wrong. But Lucine is definitely that kind of versatile guy that you can drop in the box and blow somebody up, take on a guard in the run game, blow up a screen, do whatever. And he's also got the range to be a really excellent free safety in much the same way that Harrison Smith is. And so they'd be able to run the defense that they prefer with Lucine back there, but they probably have a better pass coverage defense. And maybe as a result of that, a better running defense with Cameron Bynum in there if Lucine takes a little bit longer to kind of learn what his role in the defense is. And so you might see a little bit more staleness in the way that coverage works. Now, on the cornerback group, I think, again, this is a situation where I think you've got about a 65% chance that Cameron Dantzler starts week 1. And then by the end of the year, you've got a 75% chance or so that Booth is the starting corner for most of the season or takes more snaps over the course of the season. Again, Dantzler's been doing a really excellent job in camp. Booth has to win the job from him. Booth started out camp really great. He's been struggling a little bit. Again, he's a rookie and at the hardest position that's not quarterback for rookies to learn. Maybe besides tight end. It's just a really difficult one to pick up. And we're seeing some of those struggles. I mean, he's playing really well. He's extremely confident, which I love to see. But Dantzler's just been having a really good camp against everybody not named Justin Jefferson, and that includes Adam Thielen, right? He's doing well against Adam Thielen. Now, again, getting burned by Justin Jefferson, I mean, everybody, right?
Yeah, it's all right.
But I think that Dantzler's been having kind of the best camp I've seen from him. He's finally added good weight as opposed to bad weight, which has been a pretty persistent problem for him. He's been able to kind of, mix in kind of the level of physicality he needs along with the level of coverage discipline that he needs. And he's doing a pretty good job. And so I think that we're going to start the season with him back there. Now, the slot corner position is a huge problem. Not a lot of people talk about this. I'm glad you brought it up. There is no depth there. It's Perry Nickerson and Nate Hairston, and I don't think that either of them would make most rosters, right? And they don't have a lot of versatility there. Like you said, players like Andrew Booth, Caleb Evans, Chris Boyd, they're all outside corners, and I would consider them liabilities at slot corner. As good as I think Andrew Booth is going to be, as good as I think Cameron Dantzler might be, I think they're liabilities. And I think that the Vikings' last resort there might be to say, hey, Patrick Peterson, you're getting pretty old. Have you considered the slot? Right. Like, I think that that's kind of the only opportunity that they have, which, of course, puts Cameron Dantzler back on the field and Andrew Booth on the outside on the other side. And that would only be in a situation where Chandon Sullivan goes down or something along those lines. Right. Sullivan, I don't think has been having a remarkable camp. They don't, again, have a lot of options if that's the case. I think that the slot is going to be a matchup problem for them. We see teams put giant guys in the slot. We see teams put fast guys in the slot. And I don't know that Sullivan is good against either of those prototypes, right? He's good against like your Wes Welkers, right? Which that slot prototype is kind of dying a little bit. We don't see as many of those small shifty slot receivers. We're seeing guys that you're like, hey, are you a tight end? What are you doing here? We're seeing those guys in the slot now. And so I don't know that the Vikings have an opportunity at the slot to really improve their passing defense. That's going to be a big problem for them. And if Chandon Sullivan goes down, I don't know that they have an answer.
One final question for you, Arif, before I let you go, because I got to know, Kickers. We got to talk kickers because we're the Minnesota Vikings and we need to
Have to.
discuss this. Have to talk it. Matt Daniels made some comments earlier, really injecting Greg Joseph as his kicker, saying there's zero anxiety, calling him he's going to have a career year this year. Do you think that's feasible? And how much do you think having this new regime is going to help him? Because as we saw under Zimmer and as we've talked about the culture kind of being very negative, I think Greg Joseph felt the effects of that very directly. I mean, do you think that this is kind of a new refresh for him? And do you think a career year is feasible?
Yeah, well, the problem is that Greg Joseph has not been a particularly impressive kicker over the course of his career. So a career year and a good year are unfortunately two different things.
Right.
But he has been really good. He was 8 for 8 in camp yesterday when we watched him, including from 58, which was really impressive to see. It's one of those situations where if the Vikings are cursed at kicker, it doesn't matter who they bring in. They're cursed at kicker. You're kind of screwed either way, right? So if we kind of remove that from the equation for now, I think that all of our indications are that Greg Joseph is probably going to have a good year. Matt Daniels comes from a coaching background where he's worked with a lot of really excellent special teams coaches in his background. And, with that in mind, I'm going to kind of just trust him for now to be able to evaluate that kicker situation. And, there was a kicker competition. Greg Joseph won. It just happened to be before training camp, right? They cut Gabe Bursich by the end of camp, and so or by the end of OTAs, and so Joseph has been doing fairly well, and has been performing in pressure situations. And honestly, last year, I wouldn't say Joseph was one of the world's best kickers or anything like that, but he was fine, I think, especially compared to expectations, right? And so I think you're in a spot where kicker is maybe not an area where you'd say, hey, that's one of the strengths of our team. We're going to be a really great special teams unit, and kicking is going to be one area where we're going to win. But it's also not going to be, I think, an enormous concern. And so I think that's kind of where the Vikings are situated. Again, it's kind of one of those after the offseason, you probably want to bring in a little bit more competition, see what's going on there.
Right, exactly. Again, Arif Hasan from The Athletic. Arif, remind people where they can find you, where they can read your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL, ARIFHSAN NFL. And then you can also find me at The Athletic. Right now, I'm holding down the fort as the sole Minnesota Vikings beat writer. Chad, unfortunately, has left me.
I know.
I'm not bitter about that at all.
Yeah.
But
good timing, right? Good timing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But we might be bringing another guy in. If we do, I'll be happy to kind of spotlight what he or she has as the capability of bringing forth. But for now, if you want Vikings coverage, you got to head over to my page. Sorry. theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hasan.
Awesome. Arif, thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate you, Arif.
All right. Again, that was Arif Hasan from The Athletic. Chad Graff moving over to the New England Patriots. Love me some Chad Graff. Knew him from the Wild Beat. Best of luck to him. He returns home. Let's recap a little bit about what we discussed on Monday, Thor. I want to talk about Monday where you said the Minnesota Vikings were going to win 12. I repeat, 12 games. Now,
wow.
No, that's just a no. But why? All right, break it down for me. What are we being too optimistic? I know you're excited. We're all excited about the new offensive scheme. We're excited about the new coach. It's a fresh year. We're 0-0. But the Minnesota Vikings winning 12 games is what's giving you that confidence, man?
Well, mostly because I'm a Vikings fan sicko. Yes, I mean, is it too optimistic? Yeah, but that's we set ourselves up to get crushed every year. But as far as the mechanics of the roster and everything, that a lot of the reasons that they were poor last year, that they underachieved relative to expectations, though the need spots on that team were addressed this offseason. And a push up in or a better faring for the team. It's entirely possible because of that, if those things work out. And that's what we don't know. Like we were talking about with the Reef, Louis C. Is he going to be able to start on day one and provide an enormous impact? It's possible. That kid is super duper talented, but he also freelances a whole bunch, right? Sometimes he was caught out of position at Georgia. On that Georgia team, he was playing on, over the past 20 years, arguably the best defense in college football over the past 20 years. If not, it's one of the top 3. He was able to do that because of the guys he was playing around. In the NFL, it's a bit different. You cannot be out of position because then you just gave up a touchdown. So it'll be interesting to see on that some of the things that they did with the offensive line, if those guys can be better. The offensive line last year, a couple of those positions just absolutely stunk. And it's like Arif was talking about, even if you get below average play at center and right guard, as long as it stays at just mediocre, below average, it's going to be an upgrade over last year, which was just an abject nightmare at both positions. So we'll see about that. But I do think that there is that possibility to pretty easily jump up into 11 or 12 wins if the solutions you brought in for the main problems last year end up working out.
Ross, inject some reality for me, please.
Well, I'm just wondering, Thor, does the schedule affect your prediction at all? When you start to break down the Minnesota Vikings schedule, it appears for about the 25th year in a row, they have an incredibly difficult schedule. And I just wonder if you see any roadblocks to your 11-12 win prediction there. I know if you go back to our first edition earlier this week, available here on Purple Daily, you like them to start off, I believe, 5-0. So that's a good chunk of the 12 wins. Does the schedule give you any pause?
It doesn't actually. I'm actually pretty optimistic.
Wow.
I like that schedule.
Sticking to it. I like it.
Bullish.
I mean, look, you're playing in this crappy division where two of the teams
crappy
division. Two of the teams in that Two of the teams in that division are absolute jokes. The Bears are probably the worst team in the NFL. The Lions are still bottom 10, right? I mean, conservatively. And then the Packers, they're definitely not going to be as good this coming season as they've been the last couple of years. We don't know how much they're going to fall off. Depends on, Devontae Adams. Now you're going to, one of the NFL's worst receiving cores, and that Rodgers is not going to be better than he's been. They're going to fall off to some degree. The Vikings have to love the division they're playing in. You get to play 6 games against those teams. The Packers, we talked about this last week. You get to open with the Packers at home, which I think is an enormous competitive advantage for this Vikings team, learning all these new schemes. And then you just sort of get to ambush the Packers with them in week 1. And then the rest of this guy, I'm not scared by the rest of it. Like at Eagles, or the other teams that you're playing out of the NFC East. The Cowboys don't scare me. The Giants, teams like that. They get to play the Jets in one of their crossover games. The Saints game in London doesn't scare me a whole bunch because the Saints backfield isn't very good. I think it sets up okay for the Vikings, to be honest.
I think a huge part of that, though, has to be protecting US Bank Stadium, correct? You really can't have more than 1 or 2 home losses if you want to have path to 11 or 12 victories. You got to get it done at home.
1,000%. I was just going to say, I mean, because Ross, to your point, you have some of these road games that you're very unlikely to win, or reasonably unlikely to win, right? Like at the Bills, November 13th, you're at the Packers on January 1st. You got to at the Dolphins is another one. You could consider the Saints this. That game's in London, or they play at the Eagles in week 2. So, I mean, those are the ones where it's going to be the lower odds. You do have to defend the home turf. And back when the Vikings were really good, they consistently did that year after year. So, they'll definitely have to do that this year to jump up.
What if they get absolutely hosed by Green Bay in game 1? Does that change anything for you?
Oh, then we hit the alarms. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just saying,
we're hiding under the couch.
Because I think it's imperative for the Vikings to win, not only because it's Green Bay, not only because it's at home, but I think that's just going to set the tone. It wouldn't matter who they played in that game 1. And I know that probably sounds like, duh, of course, Jesse, but at the same time, I think they have to win that game to get confidence behind Kevin O'Connell, to get confidence behind Kirk, to get confidence behind the whole new offensive scheme they're taking. It's just an added bonus that it is against Green Bay, and that is a big mark for them to take that victory. But I think if they lose game 1, then I don't know. Yeah, like hit the alarms, right? Like then it's like, this isn't working. We're seeing that new offense we were all so excited about. Sorry to be the pessimist, guys, but I'm just injecting the reality. That's all I'm doing.
You are indeed one of us. You are a Vikings fan.
Yes, right? I know.
That's fine. You two are here to talk about it.
Exactly.
Good, bad, ugly. You are here to talk about it.
We are here to talk about it. Again, this is Before We Die with Jesse and Thor on Purple Daily.
Jesse just loves disappearing on us.
Hot unmuted takes.
Hot muted takes from Jesse Pierce.
Yes, it probably wasn't Jesse. Don't say that. That's what it was trying to do. Like,
Did your mic just edit something did you just save me work?
It did.
Is that what
it probably
you did?
It probably did. I think I was going to take some hockey take, mention Kirill Kaprizov. I don't know what I was going to do, but it's what we're going to do. On Before We Die, we wanted to set a new precedent where we each give our Before We Die takes. So, for example, Before We Die, I think the Minnesota Vikings will have a kicker that goes a perfect season, including kicks a winning field goal in an NFC North championship. That's my Before We Die prediction. I will see that happen before I die. Thor, Ross, what do you guys got before you die? What do you think could happen? It could be something silly. It could be something that could easily happen this year. Could happen tomorrow, whatever. Let's hear them.
Thor, I'll go first because I have a two-parter. First off, before we die, I believe the NFL will play a 20-game schedule and they will scrap the regular season. Or excuse me, the preseason.
Yeah. They're
wait,
going to do preseason games is what you're saying.
They're going to play 20 games and scrap the entire season? How's that possible? No, the NFL will eventually play a 20-game season before we die. Secondly, I would be remiss if I didn't hop in with an apology.
Yes.
The first show went swimmingly well. Jesse, Thor, you guys are awesome. You're incredible to deal with. No errors on your part, but an egregious error on my part. And I have a written statement right here that I would like to read.
Thank you for coming prepared.
Yeah, if you two would allow me, I would like to read this written statement. In edition number 1 of Before We Die, I mistakenly erred when I told Jessie she misspoke in reference to the days Before We Die will appear on YouTube and in podcast form. Jessie did not misspeak. I misheard her and inappropriately called her out. To Jessie, all of her family, and many friends, I am sorry. I apologize for calling you out like I did, and I will do better. I hope Jesse and all of Purple Daily on Score North can forgive this egregious error and misfortunate circumstance solely brought on by myself. I will do better. I have to do better. And with that, Thor, Before We Die.
Before we die, I don't want to see Garrett Bradbury starting at center anymore.
There we go.
I'm sick of it. You know, and we talked about it with Arif. I hope they're actually considering the possibility of one of these guys that they sign, you know, Reed, I guess being, you know, in this case, that they're actually going to consider starting him, that they're actually going to make this an open competition, much like the quarterback 2 thing is a competition or the safety 2 on the roster. The Vikings can't afford to have Garrett Bradbury playing like he's played the last couple of years. My joke is he spent more time in Kirk Cousins' lap than Cousins' infant children these last couple of years. And like Arif said, I mean, the most predictable camp report we've ever heard, Garrett Bradbury struggling. A guy who cannot deal with NFL power. Now he's going one-on-one against Harrison Phillips, who's just literally just a human forklift is how you can consider Harrison Phillips. Not a surprise at all, but you know, it just goes to speak to the issues with Bradbury's game that he has not been able to fix. We heard all these offseason stories about, oh, he's doing all this work and he's getting rolled and ragdolled at the start of camp. So before I die and hopefully before October of this year, I am hoping that Garrett Bradbury is supplanted in the starting lineup.
Bad joke alert. Do you two know what Garrett Bradbury and a Cadbury egg have in common?
They're easy to break.
They are both soft in the middle.
Yeah. I was going somewhere with cream, but then it felt inappropriate, so I just pulled on back from that.
Yeah,
so
we'll avoid that. We'll definitely avoid
my
that.
mic didn't cut that one out. But again, this is Before We Die with Jesse and Thor on Purple Daily and Score North. Ross, I accept your apology on behalf of the Jesse Pierce fan club, which has probably maybe one member. I haven't asked my husband if he's in it or not, but we'll see. Thank you very much. We can move forward now together. As always, thank you to Arif Hasan at The Athletic as well for joining us to break down some stuff while he is out at camp. We really appreciate it. Again, this is Before We Die with Jesse and Thor on Purple Daily and Score North, bringing you Vikings hot takes each and every week, having a little fun along with it. You can follow me on Twitter at Jesse, JESSI _Pierce, PIERCE. Thor, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at ThorKU, and you can find my work on Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros.
There you go. Skull. There you go. You can follow hockey work if you guys are into that. NHL.com for me. Again, thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back again next Monday and Thursday, Ross. We'll be Mondays and Thursdays every single week. Please join us then. Have a good one.